Hello everybody, Corota, Rob here. So, I want to start this video out by saying this is going to be a very interesting situation with this video and probably the only time this ever happens, but for those who don't know, I am part of two channels on YouTube. One is, of course, my main channel, Corota Kaisuki, which is mostly a gaming channel, but I'll do sort of one-off stuff like this occasionally. The other is a YouTube channel and podcast, which is all about music, which I do with my co-host Andy. Hello Andy, by the way. And so the reason I say this is kind of a weird situation is that this video is going to be probably the only video I ever do that's going to go on both of those channels. So, for you Corota Kaisuki fans, hello! For you Sound of Muzak fans, hello! This is my, I guess, bridge between channels video. So as you can see by the title, this is going to be my top 10 favorite bands video. And artists, solo artists, I would include too. Now, for those who are familiar with my Sound of Muzak channel, Andy and I did a whole podcast of our top 10 favorite bands and artists. It's on the podcast platforms, so go over to our, I guess, About Me section or just go over to the channel. You'll be able to find it, Spotify, Anchor, all that stuff. I had intended to edit that down into a single YouTube video. It just never happened. There was way too much footage. There was no video footage, so it would have been a lot of work and a lot of time that I didn't have. So if you want to see what my original pick and what Andy's original pick for our top 10 favorite bands and artists were, check that out. If you got Spotify, Anchor, all that stuff, it's all on there. But I thought maybe for both of my channels, really, I wanted to showcase kind of my top 10 favorite bands. Now, with that, it always changes, right? I mean, I say all the time that my favorite band is the one that I'm currently into the most or listening to, which is kind of true because I'll get in these big moods where I'll mostly want to hear one artist or like a handful of artists. I think everybody goes through that, really. Or even I'm just obsessed with a certain album or two. And, you know, obviously it's my sort of flavor of the month kind of thing. Now, that being said, there is a huge pool of artists that I constantly go back to and that I love to replay over and over, or even, you know, even if I don't replay their albums, I'll check out one of their albums that I maybe am not as familiar with and rediscover my love of them all over again. So what this is sort of, it's kind of a definitive list, I guess, of my favorite bands. It's actually different from the list I did with Andy. That being said, it is slightly different. My tastes are constantly evolving and changing and what have you. So I wouldn't take this list too seriously. And as a YouTuber that I really love who reviews sci-fi books always talks about, it's my fucking list. And if your favorite artist isn't on there or you don't like my list, too bad. I'm not saying any of these bands are the greatest bands ever. I'm just saying, for me, these are my favorite artists, and that's that. So if you like these artists or you agree with me, I want to hear about it. Or better yet, why don't you, show me up and show your supreme musical knowledge and put it in the comments below, and we can have a nice little discussion about it. So that being said, these are my top 10 favorite bands. I'm going to say bands. It's really bands and solo artists. There's two solo artists on here. So I'm going to say bands. My top 10 favorite bands. So I'm going to get to the top 10, but as I always like to do, I'm going to do an honorable mention top 5, and I'm going to make this one very brief. So I'm just going to go down my little list here of my honorable mentions. There's 5 that I could think of. Number 1 is The Who, which actually made my top 10 on the list I did with Andy. And they almost made the top 10 again, but I thought, you know what? I talked a lot about The Who last time. I love The Who. I go back to them, not as much as probably the other bands on this list, but I still love them. They have so many great songs, quite a few good albums as well, and they're just a powerhouse band. They're one of those bands where I think that each member of the band is very important. So, and they're a classic. So, The Who, just shy of making my top 10. I also want to talk about Mark Bolan and TRex, who probably my favorite glam rock band. I would say, yeah, glam rock band. Yeah, TRex is probably the ultimate. One of the handful of bands that really got me into music. For those who don't know TRex, 70s band, really influential on glam rock, punk, later glam metal, and just rock in general. Mark Bolan, one of the greatest British songwriters, in my opinion, of all time. So, excellent band. The only problem TRex has, and I think why they didn't make it the list, is they don't really have a lot of albums. They started out as Tyrannosaurus Rex, and they did, I think it's about 4 or 5 folk albums where they're just a folk duo, and then they became sort of, kind of like how Bob Dylan went electric. That's kind of what happened to TRex, and that's when they exploded. And they have about 3 or 4 really good albums that I like from the TRex era, but not quite a lot of, not really quite enough albums to, I think, warrant their inclusion on the top 10. But I still love, love, love TRex. Also, just shy of making it is Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin I have an interesting relationship with. I love Led Zeppelin, and I spent many, many hours listening to Led Zeppelin. I've listened to all their albums. I like pretty much all their albums and everything. There's a few songs by them I kind of get sick of hearing. Are they overrated? I don't know. Maybe. I don't necessarily think so. I don't know. They're played a lot on radio for sure. Classic rock radio really has kind of worn out a few of their tunes, but they are an excellent band. Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, John Bonham. So many great classic songs, so many great classic albums. My personal favorite probably being actually the debut album. I love Houses of the Holy. I love Physical Graffiti. Zeppelin 3 is underrated. So, I mean, Led Zeppelin, amazing, amazing classic hard rock band. Super important band, and I love them, but just shy of making my top 10. Another one that is just shy, and this is an interesting one because this band's quite different from most of the other bands on this list, is Creedence Clearwater Revival. I love Creedence. They've only got 5 or 6 albums, of which all of them, but I think their last album, I love all their hit songs. I don't get tired of hearing their music. Another one of those bands that got me into music when I originally started getting into music in high school. John Fogerty, just an amazing singer-songwriter, and the rest of Creedence too. Solid musicians and you know, fantastic riffs, fantastic songwriting. Just an amazing 60s band, probably like top 5 60s band for me. I absolutely love Creedence Clearwater Revival. And then probably the newest entry in terms of the closest to getting into the top 10 is a band that I've, over the last couple years, really, really started to love more and more and more, is the progressive rock band Gentle Giant. Gentle Giant was a really weird, quirky band that, God, they mixed so many different kinds of musical styles together. Very eclectic, very, in some ways, very British, but also mixing a lot of rock sensibilities in it. So, in other words, complex arrangements, very eclectic influences, lots of different instruments that you don't normally hear in rock bands in their music, but they could also write a song. They could make a tune that was super complex but also catchy, particularly on albums like Freehand or Power and the Glory, or maybe some stuff in Interview. But along those lines, they had some classic proggy stuff in the early part of their career, and they had just some really weird shit, like the albums Octopus and In a Glass House. So they're kind of are all over the place, and you know, they've pretty much been defunct since the since 1980 or so. But the more I listen to this band, particularly Steven Wilson remixes of their albums, the more I love them. Gentle Giant, love Gentle Giant. One of my favorite prog rock bands. So, let's get into the top 10. I'm going to try to fly through them so this isn't like an hour-long video. So, coming in at number 10 is the mighty Iron Maiden. So Iron Maiden is a band that more and more over the years I just love. I had the great opportunity to finally see them live right before the pandemic, actually. It was summer 2019 with my friend Matt. We saw them at the Barclays Center in New York City, and it was one of the greatest concerts I've ever been to. Just for guys in their 60s, they had so much energy. They had the crowd with them the whole time. Bruce Dickinson still sounds amazing for his age. The guitar players were amazing. Like the entire band has so much energy, and just, I don't know how they keep doing it at the age they are. No offense to you guys in Maiden, because I'm sure you'll definitely see this video. But no, I mean, just a powerhouse band. I'm not as familiar with the newer stuff. Probably, I would say, from like 90s or so on. Like many Maiden fans, my favorite stuff is the classic era. I would recommend just about anything from the debut album to about Seventh Son, maybe some of Fear of the Dark. Really, really great stuff. Power Slave, Peace of Mind, Somewhere in Time. It's between Power Slave and Somewhere in Time as to which album of theirs is my favorite. Peace of Mind is really great too. As I said, Seventh Son of Seventh Son, if you want some kind of proggy elements in with your heavy metal. Just amazing, amazing power slash progressive metal, whatever you want to call Iron Maiden. They're really their own thing, and they kind of wrote the book on that sort of subgenre of heavy metal. And I mean, and really metal itself being one of probably the flagship band from the new wave of British heavy metal scene. So Iron Maiden, as the more I listen to them, the more I love them. They have so many great songs, so many great albums. Just that band is an institution. Just you might not know it unless you're a big metalhead in America, but overseas, Maiden are as big as Metallica, as big as, I mean, you name any huge arena rock band, Iron Maiden is that huge in just about every part of the world. So amazing longevity, amazing musicianship, great songwriting, just fantastic band. One of my favorite heavy metal bands. Number 9 is a man by the name of Mr. Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. So the interesting thing about Zappa is he is one of the most eclectic artists, I think, that I've ever come across, but he was also one of the first artists I got into. So I think between him and another artist that will basically be featured on this list, probably him in particular gave me an appreciation for the weird side of music. He wrote some catchy tunes, but he was very much a composer. I would even say like an avant-garde composer trapped inside of the context of I guess a rock band leader, however you want to say. And he mixed humor and weird sort of eclectic influences with R&B and rock, and some people even credit him with being one of the early influencers of metal and harder rock, stuff like that. He did jazz, he did classical, he did so many different kinds of music and worked with so many different artists. The man was a genius and just an amazing musician and composer, and he really is in a league of his own in the sense, not necessarily that he's far and away above everybody else, just that he's so different from just about any other artist in contemporary music that I don't know, you either love Zappa or you don't. I think I don't meet too many people who are in between with Zappa, but he was a hugely influential guy on me, both musically and otherwise. I just really liked his. I've always liked his personality. He's a bit prickly, but he was very, very sharp, and amazingly never did drugs. When you hear his music, a lot of people assume, oh, he was really whacked out. Never really touched the stuff, and was in fact rallied against drugs. So I always found that an interesting sort of juxtaposition with Zappa, that he was so weird but didn't touch drugs, unlike a lot of his contemporaries from that time period. And yeah, just he has so many great albums, so many different periods of his music. I love everything from the early Mothers of Invention stuff like Freak Out, We're Only in It for the Money, Absolutely Free, to like his classic 70s period where you got stuff like Apostrophe, Overnight Sensation, Shake Your Booty, Joe's Garage, those albums that everybody knows that has these kind of funnier, weird, sort of novelty-esque songs, I guess. And a lot of his instrumental stuff too. I mean, from what I've heard, I haven't heard all of it. He has a huge catalog, but there's stuff of his I don't like. I'll say that. I don't think his albums are a little more hit and miss than others. But I always give Zappa credit for trying different things and trying many different musical styles, all within the confines of, well, I guess several bands, but one man, I guess, one mind. But yet somehow it's all sort of linked together. It's weird. I don't know. Zappa's not for everybody, but I've always really loved him. Number 8 is a band that, if you're watching on Sound of Music, we did a whole discography series on, so you'll probably know who this is going to be. This is King Crimson. One of the big probably the first true progressive rock band. I love myself some prog rock, and I would say that probably In the Core of the Crimson King is the most important album that established that genre, which was released in the late 1960s, I believe it was 69, and just brought rock musicianship to a whole different level, incorporating jazz elements, incorporating what I always perceive to be some classical elements mixed with rock, just a totally different approach to playing rock and roll, a lot tighter, kind of crazy time signatures, highly structured music, heavy music, really. King Crimson is just probably the darkest band in progressive rock and really pioneered the genre. And it's kind of like what I was saying about Zappa. It's all centered around one man, Robert Fripp, the guitar player, who has had many different lineups of King Crimson, and they've all kind of like Zappa. It's all kind of unified under the King Crimson banner, and you know it's King Crimson, but the band is taken in so many different directions, probably because of, well, the different periods of time when the albums came out, but also the different musicians that have been in and out of the band. So King Crimson is, again, one of those bands for me where it scratches many different itches, and they really do so many different things. Does it always work? No, not at all. But I always appreciate bands that don't just stick to one formula for their entire career and constantly evolve. That's what I love about music, really. I like all kinds of different music, and I like seeing the evolution of a band. So King Crimson, amazing stuff. If anybody doesn't know them, I recommend Court of the Crimson King, any of the, well, actually, not a big fan of Starless and Bible Black, but definitely Lark's Tongues and Aspic and Red, which is part of this sort of the late 70s, well, mid-late 70s trilogy of albums, and an album called Discipline if you want to check out their 80s stuff. They're really kind of all over the map, but they're excellent, so definitely check out King Crimson. Number 7 is my one sheet. I kind of combined two bands into one, but I think if you know the bands and you're familiar with me and my tastes, I don't think anybody's really going to have a big problem with it. And if you do, too bad. It's my list. Sorry. So number 7 are the bands Deep Purple and Rainbow. So there is one unifying factor between Rainbow and Deep Purple, and that is Ritchie Blackmore, the guitar player who was involved with Deep Purple pretty much all through their classic period, and then formed his own band called Rainbow. There's a specific time frame of the Deep Purple Rainbow catalog that I kind of lumped together a little bit that I love, and that's the stuff from In Rock, which is the first album with actually not the first album with Ian Gillan, but for the first classic Deep Purple Mark II lineup of Deep Purple, and it would start from about In Rock to an album called Long Live Rock and Roll by Rainbow. I like some of the Purple stuff before and after there. It's not that I don't like, I wouldn't say all that stuff's crap. I like Perfect Strangers, for example, which is when they reunited with Ritchie Blackmore. And I've heard a few little things since, post that, in the modern era that I thought were pretty good. But for me, the core Deep Purple is In Rock, Fireball, Machine Head, Who Do We Think We Are, Made in Japan, Burn, Stormbringer, and even kind of Come Taste the Band, which was the album that they did after Ritchie Blackmore left with Tommy Bolin. And then on to Rainbow, which was formed with Ronnie James Dio, which is, of course, the 3 Rainbow albums, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow Rising and Long Live Rock and Roll. I've heard some post-Dio Rainbow stuff, which I think is pretty good, but I don't think it touches the Dio stuff. I've just never been able really to get into it, but I think those 3 Dio albums are amazing. So if you can bear with me here, In Rock to about, for Deep Purple, In Rock to Come Taste the Band, and then from in the first 3 Rainbow albums, that's the period I'm mostly talking to. So the classic lineup. Ritchie Blackmore is my favorite guitar player, I think, ever. I just love his sound. I love that he kind of gave birth to the neoclassical way of playing guitar. Very intricate, but also writes monster riffs. I mean, he wrote Smoke on the Water, probably the ultimate guitar riff. Amazing soloist. Some amazing musicians in and out of Deep Purple and Rainbow. Ian Gillan, an amazing vocalist. David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes, amazing singers from the Burns, Stormbringer, Come Taste the Band era. Ronnie James Dio, my favorite singer of all time. The stuff he did with Rainbow, and the stuff that Blackmore and Dio did together with Cozy Powell and you know, Tony Carey and Jimmy Bain and some of those other musicians that were in Rainbow are just some of my absolute favorite hard rock moments and songs and albums that I think ever. So just some amazing stuff there. Deep Purple, of course. I mean, everybody loves the classic, you know, sort of, I guess you could say, trilogy of In Rock, Fireball. Fireball is my favorite Deep Purple album, and Machine Head. I would check out any of those albums that I mentioned. They're all really, really great. I didn't even mention Roger Glover and Ian Pace and John Lord, amazing keyboard player John Lord. Just so many amazing musicians in that band, and some of the best hard rock recorded in the 70s. Just awesome. You got to check out the Deep Purple family of albums. So yeah, definitely high on my list. Number 6 is the only other solo artist on here. And I mean, I guess if you count Zappa and the Mothers being a band, then this person would be the only solo artist. And those of you who are fans of Sound of Music won't be surprised. Mr. David Bowie. One of the greatest songwriters of all time, in my opinion. David Bowie was probably, aside from another artist, which people who know me will know what artist that is that's going to be on this list. But David Bowie was probably my number 2 artist that got me into music. I had a greatest hits of his that I used to listen to over and over. And, you know, we did a whole discography series on David Bowie, which we kind of paused at around the Scary Monsters era. From about Space Oddity to Let's Dance, I'm very familiar, especially because of the discography series we've done, but just many albums that I've listened to within that period over the years. And just the relationship I've had with David Bowie on and off my entire, you know, music fan life, whatever you want to say. He's just a very important artist to me. I really love so many of his songs. He's a great songwriter. I'm not really familiar with the later part of his career, but I've heard the last 4 albums of his or so are really amazing. 'Cause I know Heathen a bit. I like Heathen, and then the middle part I'm really not as familiar with either. But that being said, the albums of his that I love, I really adore. Ziggy Stardust, Diamond Dogs, the Berlin Trilogy, Aladdin Sane, you know, all of that classic Bowie era stuff is just amazing. He really is a monster songwriter. He's honestly a great vocalist. I think he's a little underrated in terms of vocals. The more you listen to his stuff, the more you realize how diverse his singing can be, and I just think he's fantastic. I mean, he's a true artist. He's called kind of a chameleon because he can really blend in with just about any popular music scene that's going on and make it his. There's a couple of hiccups where it didn't necessarily work, but overall I think he was very good at blending into what was current and staying relevant. So David Bowie, timeless artist. Many, many people love him, and for good reason. Alright, we're going to get into the top 5 here. So these are my top 5 favorite bands, and we're going to start with number 5, the Beatles. I mean, it's probably cliche, everybody loves the Beatles. I have a very strange relationship with the Beatles. I'm very on and off with them. I tend to be the kind of person that when I'm into the Beatles, I'm into the Beatles. I want to listen to nothing but the Beatles. And then I don't listen to them for like a year or a year and a half, and I don't really want much to do with them. And then I get really into the Beatles again. They were probably the very first band that I ever really liked. My dad is a huge Beatles nut, and aside from all the pretty bad music my mom would play over and over when I was a kid, I'm talking like soft rock and country, I would hear the Beatles and I go, wow, the Beatles are actually really good. So, I mean, those guys are just really important to a lot of people. I could probably go on and on about the Beatles. It's hard to say anything about the Beatles that hasn't been said before. I like their early period, but for me, Rubber Soul On is sort of my Beatles. It's the period of time that I like. They got tons of great stuff from their early period. I just don't think the albums hold up quite as well. Stuff from Help is really good, and maybe some stuff in Please Please Me, but it's just a lot of it's sort of the same kind of formula, which it works for them because they're such great songwriters, Lennon and McCartney. But to me, it gets a little tired after a while. It's Rubber Soul, it's Revolver, it's more and more for me, actually, the Magical Mystery Tour is one of my favorites. It's Abbey Road, probably my favorite Beatles album. That stuff is, to me, the cream of the crop when it comes to the Beatles. So, haven't seen Get Back yet, but I mean, it is like many, many hours of footage. I've seen a lot of bits and pieces of it, and I've really liked what I've seen about it, but overall, I don't know. I'm definitely a humongous Beatles fan. There'll always be a band that's in my top 10, but I do have that really weird sort of hands-off approach. I think it's because I've heard so much of their stuff, and just I don't know what it is. It's a very weird relationship with them. I adore them, but it's kind of like that sibling that you really love when you see them. I'm not talking about any of my siblings, by the way, if you watch this, but it's kind of like if you have that situation where you have a sibling and you don't necessarily get along with them very well when you live with them, but then, you know, you move away, you see them a few times a year, and then when you see them, you just adore them and you have such a great time with them. That's my relationship with the Beatles. So I'll always love the Beatles, but it's not necessarily an affinity to the point where it's all Beatles all the time. So yeah, kind of a weird way to present it given they're in the top 5, but that's my opinion. Oh, I also had the chance to see Ringo in concert, so I have seen one of the Beatles, and he was really good. So yeah, the Beatles. Number 4 is, for me, the greatest heavy metal band of all time, and it's Black fucking Sabbath. I love Black Sabbath, and I'm going to concentrate mostly on the Ozzy era and the Dio era, much like as I talked about with Deep Purple and Rainbow. For me, I consider it sort of the first Black Sabbath album to about the Mob Rules for Black Sabbath. I've heard Born Again, which is the album with Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. I've liked parts of that. I've heard a little bit in between of some of the other stuff, like the Glenn Hughes stuff and the Tony Martin stuff, which I liked well enough. It kind of Black Sabbath kind of turned into a sort of Tony Iommi solo thing in a way after the Dio stuff. But yeah, the classic Ozzy era and the classic Dio era is some of the best heavy metal. I'd argue probably the best heavy metal ever recorded. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, Master Reality. I think Paranoid is an amazing album, and some of the songs, sure, have they gotten overplayed? I'll give you that, but I still love them. The debut album, just really dark and sort of atmospheric, really, really cool sounding, really heavy. Tony Iommi, in my opinion, might be the riff master of all time. The man just has tons and tons of riffs. Geezer Butler, one of my favorite bass players of all time. Bill Ward bringing sort of like a blues meets jazz drumming style, which I always really liked. Ozzy with his sort of dark, you know, Ozzy vocals, and then later Ronnie James Dio with his amazing sort of operatic, intense, gritty, yet just beautiful vocals. I mean, any of that. I'd say for me, the golden Sabbath would be Master Reality, Volume 4, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, Sabotage, Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules. Those are probably my favorites, with Paranoid and the debut in there too, and maybe a little Technical Ecstasy. Never Say Die is pretty good. It's not nearly on the same, I wouldn't put it on the same pedestal as I would put some of those other albums, but that era of Sabbath, pretty much from their inception to about early 80s. I think Mob Rules came out like 81, 82. That's the golden era of Sabbath for me. Just, again, monster riffs, great songs, heaviness, I also like the kind of psychedelic, lighter part of Sabbath in songs like Planet Caravan and Solitude and Fluff. They did have a lighter side that nobody talks about for some reason, and I like that contrast between their really dark, heavy stuff and their kind of light, psychedelic stuff. So, yeah, just some amazing stuff. Black Sabbath is just, again, as I'll say it again, the greatest heavy metal band of all time. Number 3 is a prog band. You can't really call them, I guess, solely a prog band, but anyway, one of my favorite bands of all time, and that's Jethro Tull. I talk about these guys all the time. I think they're hugely underrated in terms of this classic era of rock. Ian Anderson, I think, belongs way, way up in the top echelon of great songwriters. A lot of times I feel British songwriters don't necessarily get the due that they deserve. You know, notwithstanding artists like the Beatles, like the really huge ones, or somebody like David Bowie. Ian Anderson very much writes. He's very English, like he does not hide that. He doesn't try to be a Mick Jagger or or a Roger Daltrey or somebody like that. Who I love, by the way. Not at all criticizing them, but he doesn't try to sound like he's singing, American rock or American blues. Except maybe in the very, very early albums, but when they were originally a blues band, he sounds like an English guy singing. He comes from more of like the English folk and classical tradition. Of course, there's blues elements, but there's also jazzy elements. There's folk elements. There's all kinds of acoustic elements. There's later on world elements from various different musical, different styles of music from many different countries. Ian Anderson is very good at absorbing sort of different types of music and kind of injecting it into Jethro Tull. And as I was saying, in the beginning of me talking about them, I think he's an amazing songwriter, especially from that early era, Aqualung, Thick as a Brick, Stand Up, the Folk Trilogy, which is 3 of my favorite albums, Songs from the Wood, Heavy Horses, and Stormwatch. I am a huge fan of Tull's catalog. I think you can't go wrong with most of their 70s albums, and even some of their later albums like Crest of a Knave or Roots to Branches. Their new album, The Zealot Gene, is pretty good too, actually. I've really enjoyed that. And of course you have the amazing Martin Barre on guitar, who I'm actually going to be seeing live as of the recording of this at the end of the week, which I'm really excited about. And, I've also seen Jethro Tull with Ian Anderson and Martin Barre, and I've seen Ian Anderson solos. So I've managed to see a bit of this band, and I just love, again, as I talked about with Zappa and King Crimson, influences all over the place. It's undeniably Jethro Tull you're listening to. They have that sound, but they go many different places with it. I love, particularly with Ian Anderson and Martin Barre and just the Jethro Tull sound, the sort of blending of acoustic and electric instruments. I think that Jethro Tull does it better than any other band. You will get a beautiful acoustic playing, like acoustic guitar playing. You'll get stuff like accordion and mandolin and glockenspiel and all of these and other woodwind instruments. Of course, you have the flute. I didn't even talk about the flute. Probably the staple instrument of Jethro Tull. But then you blend them with heavy guitar and heavy drums sometimes, and kind of that thundering bass tone, especially in Aqualung and albums like that. And I just love that blend. I think it's just done to perfection. And Jethro Tull, again, I think are a very underrated band, belong in the top echelon of the pantheon of rock gods. And yeah, absolutely love them. Check out Jethro Tull. And we're getting to the top 2. So these top 2 could be interchangeable, but I think they've been pretty consistent for a long time. And this, on some days, I think is my #1 band, but I guess they're a solid number 2. Anyway, number 2 is the amazing Canadian trio, Rush. Probably my favorite band I've ever seen live. Seen them 3 times. Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, Neil Peart. Probably the greatest 3-piece band of all time. They are some of the best musicians in rock, I think. Absolutely crazy musicianship, especially that bottom line, Geddy Lee and Neil Peart on drums, or Geddy Lee on bass, Neil Peart on drums, and I mean, Alex Lifeson's no slouch either. He shouldn't be underrated either, but the sound that those three guys get and the arrangements they do, the complex music they play, alongside of writing good songs. I mean, I think Neil Peart's a great lyricist. I think he's also underrated. He writes more philosophical type lyrics, which I really like, as opposed to kind of lovey-dovey stuff, which I don't have a problem with that either. But I think I just love the deeper sort of, it's kind of like thinking man's sort of lyrics. I've always really enjoyed that approach more, and Neil Peart is the master of that. Just three classy guys. Always, I think, really I've written the book on the way to conduct yourselves as people and musicians within the music industry. They never really had infighting. They never really had drama. They ended on a high note. They don't really have any weak albums. This could be my own personal bias, but I don't think there's any such thing as a bad Rush album. There are weaker ones for sure. There's some songs that I'm not really thrilled with, but the deeper I go into their catalog, the more I love them. Everything from the early days to when they were a hard rock band to the classic sort of hard rock prog era to the 80s stuff. I actually like a lot of that stuff. I love how they kind of refound themselves in the 90s with that sort of really hard like heavy sound again, back to that kind of classic Rush sound, and just amazing musicians. And rest in peace to the professor, the almighty Neil Peart, one of the greatest drummers of all time. And again, amazing, thought-provoking lyrics and just a brilliant man. So I love Rush. Probably the best band I've ever seen live, and they got better every time I saw them, and I'm not just saying that. They really did. And I feel very fortunate that I was able to catch them. So many great memories with that band. I have probably more of an emotional attachment with that band than almost any other band. If I put them on and I'm cruising and it's a sunny day and I just crank up Spirit of the Radio, it brings me back to, simpler times when I was first getting into music, and I went and saw Rush and would hang out with my friends, and I just love this band, and just the best. Okay, and that brings me to my #1 pick, which is, of course, the almighty, amazing Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd was the band that got me into music. I've said this before on one of our other videos that I did with Andy, that Dark Side of the Moon is my favorite album of all time, and it was the album that got me into music. That continues to be the case. I find that I hold up a lot of classic albums. I kind of hold them to that standard, where Dark Side of the Moon has sort of this, it's thematic throughout the whole thing. It's the perfect blend of great songwriting, great musicianship, great atmosphere, great lyrics, amazing vocal harmonies, amazing melodies. It's one sort of piece. It really introduced me to the album format, and it's kind of the reason why I like listening to albums as opposed to... I mean, I do still love... with Spotify, I have playlists all day. I love playlists, but I think it's the reason probably I enjoy the album format so much, and I put other bands up to that kind of... I hold other bands up to Dark Side in kind of like what I'm looking for. Not necessarily in the sense of the sound, but in the approach, I guess. And to me, probably Pink Floyd means more to me than just about any other band, rivaling maybe Rush, just that they've always felt like my band. They've always felt like the band that I just always went back to. Unlike the Beatles, where I'm never unhappy to listen to Pink Floyd at all. But unlike the Beatles, I do have a hands-off approach a little bit with Pink Floyd. But that's because I try to treat myself to them, because I feel like if I were to listen to them constantly, I might burn myself out on them. I've come close a few times. So I treat myself to Dark Side of the Moon. I treat myself to The Wall. I treat myself to Wish You Were Here. These albums that I treasure and that have always been really, really important to me. For me, the best Floyd would be the period of Adam Hart Mother to about Animals. There's a couple here and there albums that I really love. Outside of that, I actually really like Saucerful Secrets. I like the debut, and I like the Division Bell, which was the post-Waters era. But to me, the golden era of Pink Floyd was, you know, Adam Heartmother, Metal, less so Obscured by Clouds, but I'd still put it in there. Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and Animals. Those are all amazing albums. I still love The Wall too. I almost underrate The Wall because I'm like, oh, everybody loves The Wall too much. And then I'll listen to The Wall and I'll go, oh yeah, The Wall's a masterpiece. Which it is, but I just don't love them quite as much as some of those other albums that I mentioned. So, but yeah, I mean, Roger Waters, amazing songwriter, great bass player. David Gilmour has that beautiful voice and that beautiful guitar playing. One of the most soulful guitar players in rock. Richard Wright, probably the George Harrison group. Very, very just great with the atmosphere and his sort of subtle textured keyboards and piano playing. And I also really love his voice, the way he harmonizes with David Gilmour. And Nick Mason, just a very solid drummer, and better than people give him credit for. Very, very good drummer. And yeah, Pink Floyd is my #1, my favorite band of all time. If you don't know Pink Floyd, if you don't listen to them, go do that. You sort it out, okay? You go fix that. Because, yeah, it's they are one of the greatest bands of all time. And Kevin, if you see this, screw you for your comments on Pink Floyd. I love you, buddy. I'm just kidding. So that's it. That's my top 10 favorite bands and a couple of solo artists that I really love. What are your top 10 favorite bands? Put them in the comments below. To all you Kuroda Kaisuki people, thank you for being patient checking out this video. I know it's not necessarily gaming content, but this was something I thought would be interesting to talk about because I almost never talk about music on the channel, but it is sort of my, it's always kind of there in the background, so I guess as music tends to be, but it should be in the foreground. See what I did there? And you Sound of Music people, sorry it's been a while since we've done any videos. Andy and I have both been very busy. This was just sort of like a one-off idea I had to put on both channels because, I don't know, I'm crazy. What can I say? I just wanted to do this. And, yeah, please feel free to subscribe to both channels because they're both great. If you like gaming, great. Subscribe to Kuroda Kaisuki. If you like music, more likely the audience for this video, go check out Sound of Music. The links will all be in the description below for both channels. And hey, thanks for watching, guys. Love you all. Till next time. Peace.